All right, let's go. The smell hits you first, bleach over something the bleach can't fully cover, in the back room of a social club on Mulberry Street, October 1972. The sit-down room. You're standing in the back room of a social club on Mulberry Street, and it's a Tuesday, which means nothing to anyone but you, because Tuesday is when the envelopes move. The folding table has a coffee ring that's been there longer than some of the men sitting around it. The routine is this. You arrive at 4, you check the back door is bolted, you put the radio on low, you wait. Tonight the thing that isn't routine is that Tony hasn't called ahead. He always calls ahead. You watch a man named Sally, not his real name. Nobody uses real names here, set 2 cups of espresso on the table without being asked, because he can read a room the way other men read a paper. The capo across from you, a man who answers to a name you won't be saying out loud in this lifetime, taps his ring against the table 3 times. 2 blocks away, a funeral home on Houston Street is already fully booked for the week. A coincidence, everyone will tell you, but you've learned that coincidences in this business tend to wear shoes that match. The official record, years later, will list this as a routine meeting between associates, no further detail given, filed under an organized crime task force memo that never made the papers. What the men in that room remember is different. They remember the silence before Tony walked in, and the way nobody touched their espresso until he sat down. The meeting was resolved, per later testimony before a grand jury, as a discussion regarding business matters pertaining to the Lower East Side. The transcript runs 4 lines. What it leaves out is who didn't come back from it. But the task force's filing isn't wrong exactly, and yet it cannot account for the espresso going cold on that table, 2 full cups, untouched, for the rest of that meeting. Multiply that 1 cold cup by every sit-down that decade, and you start to understand how many rooms in this city went quiet at exactly 4 o'clock. You're not a spectator here. You're the one who poured the coffee. The Gallo hit. You're standing outside Umberto's Clam house on Mulberry Street, and it's just past 5 in the morning on April 7, 1972. The restaurant just opened. Routine. The early crowd, a few cops getting off shift, a birthday party winding down at a corner table. The thing that isn't routine is the man at that table, Joe Gallo, out celebrating his birthday, sitting with his back exposed to the door, which everyone in this life knows you don't do, except Joey never did follow the rules that kept other men alive. You hear it before you understand it, not a bang, more a series of cracks close together, the way a string of firecrackers sounds wrong when you're the one it's aimed at. A wife screams. A waiter drops a tray of clams, and the sound of the shells hitting tile is somehow louder in memory than the gunfire was. Gallo gets up, staggers out the door, makes it to the middle of Hester Street before he goes down for good. 2 blocks of funeral parlors in that neighborhood would be fully booked within the month, not from this alone, but this was the one that started the dominoes. The official record states Joseph Gallo died of multiple gunshot wounds sustained during an altercation of undetermined origin, case remaining open, no arrests made. What the men in the social club said, quietly for years, was that Joey had been laughing too loud in the wrong man's city, and that laughing too loud has a price tag attached to it that the NYPD never wrote down. The case was officially closed as unsolved. No one was ever charged. The file does not record who sat where, who left early, who made a call from a payphone 4 minutes before the first shot. But the NYPD's report isn't dishonest. It just isn't the whole room. And yet it cannot explain why 3 different men in 3 different boroughs suddenly took unannounced vacations to Florida that same week. That's not a detail. That's a city holding its breath. You were never just a witness to this. You were the next call somebody had to make. The envelope you're told to deliver. You're standing in a stairwell on Sullivan Street, and it's December 1973, and the envelope in your coat is thicker than usual. Routine. You deliver envelopes on the first of the month. You don't open them. You don't ask. Tonight, the thing that isn't routine is that you've been told this one isn't for a bookmaker, it's for a cop, a detective with a desk on the third floor of the local precinct, a man who has, until now, only ever taken the smaller envelopes. You climb the stairs and you feel your own pulse in your collar. You see the detective's face through the frosted glass of his office door before he opens it, tired, unbothered, a man who has made peace with what he is. He doesn't count the money in front of you. That's its own kind of message. He just says, "Tell him it's appreciated," and closes the door, and you stand there a second longer than you need to. Because once you hand this particular envelope to this particular man, you are no longer a kid who runs errands. You are someone who has bought a police detective with your own two hands. What gets written up, decades later in a corruption commission's findings, is a generic line about patterns of undue financial influence within the precinct, the extent and duration of which could not be conclusively established. What the old-timers remember is which detectives' kids went to which private school on a civil servant's salary. The commission's resolution: an internal reprimand, no criminal charges, the detective's pension left untouched, his name redacted in the public version of the report. But the commission did its job, technically. They followed the money as far as the money let them be followed. And yet the report cannot tell you what it felt like to watch a man's hand not move toward an envelope he absolutely intended to take. That's not corruption on a page. That's corruption you can hear, in the silence between his words. You don't get to walk back down those stairs, the same person who walked up them. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't a story about bad men doing obvious things. It's about how ordinary every single one of these rooms felt while it was happening. Stay with me. It gets closer from here. Crazy Joe's last toast, reframed through you, the fixer. You're sitting 2 tables down from Joe Gallo at Umberto's, on the same morning as before, except this time you're not outside. You were inside the whole time, the man whose job was to read the room before anyone else needed to. Routine. Birthday dinners run late, security relaxes after midnight, the owner comps a round of drinks. The thing that isn't routine is that you clocked a face at the bar you didn't recognize. 20 minutes before the first shot, and you didn't say anything, because you weren't sure. And being unsure in this business is its own kind of guilt you carry for the rest of your life. You watch Gallo raise his glass to his wife, his daughter asleep on a banquette nearby, his bodyguard a step too far from the door. You hear him laugh, not a big laugh, just a private one, the kind a man does when he thinks the night's already won. Then the face from the bar moves. You don't remember deciding to duck. Your body decided for you. The official cause of death lists multiple gunshot wounds. Location: Hester and Mulberry. Time of death officially recorded as 5:30 a.m. What the people in the room remember is that Gallo's last act, conscious, deliberate, was to push his daughter's chair further from the door before he tried to run. The case file closes with the standard language: investigation ongoing, no suspects apprehended, informant testimony deemed insufficient for indictment. It does not mention the daughter at all. But the file isn't lying. Informant testimony really was insufficient, legally. And yet no court document will ever record the specific weight of watching a man's last clear decision be about someone else's safety, not his own. That single gesture outlived every headline this story ever got. You were the one who saw the face first. You will carry that for the rest of your life. What a fixer actually fixes. You're standing in a laundromat basement on Elizabeth Street, July 1974, and it's the part of the job nobody glamorizes, not the violence, the bookkeeping. Routine. You reconcile 3 sets of numbers every week: the real take, the reported take, and the number that goes to the man who needs to believe the first 2 are the same. Tonight, the thing that isn't routine is that the numbers don't reconcile. Not by a little, by enough that someone in this operation has been skimming for months, and it's your job to find out who before someone else does it more permanently. You go through receipts under a bare bulb, and you can hear water running through pipes above your head, and somewhere up there is a man doing his actual laundry, completely unaware that 2 floors down a small fortune in skimmed cash is being unwound sheet by sheet. You find the discrepancy in a numbers runner named Frankie's route, small amounts, careful amounts, the kind a smart man takes because he assumes no one checks that carefully. You did. What ends up in a federal wiretap transcript years later is a single sanitized line. Subject discussed discrepancies in weekly receipts with an associate identified as FR. What actually happened in that basement was a much longer conversation, conducted in a tone so calm it scared Frankie more than yelling would have. The resolution officially: Frankie relocated to New Jersey for personal reasons the following spring. No charges, no incident report, nothing. But the wiretap transcript captured exactly what it captured: a few sentences, dry, procedural. And yet it cannot capture the specific quiet of Frankie's hands when you laid the real numbers next to the reported ones. Multiply that quiet by every skimmer this organization ever caught, and you start to understand how an entire economy ran on men too afraid to ever ask for a raise. You were the only person in that basement who already knew how this had to end. The last favor you can't refuse. You're standing on a pier in Red Hook, Brooklyn, March 1975, just after 2 a.m., and the water is doing that thing it does at night where it sounds louder than it should. Routine. Pier meetings happen for cargo disputes, nothing more, usually resolved with a handshake and a number. Tonight the thing that isn't routine is that the man standing across from you, a capo connected to the Gambino crew, isn't here about cargo. He's here to ask you for something you've spent 6 years avoiding being asked to do. He doesn't raise his voice. That's the part that gets you. He says it the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt. There's a man, a loose end from the Gallo business, still talking to people he shouldn't be talking to, and it needs to stop being a problem by Friday. You feel the cold coming up off the water through your shoes. You feel your own breathing, which you've never noticed before this exact moment in your life. He waits. He's good at waiting. What goes in absolutely no official record is this conversation. It doesn't exist. It never happened. 2 men stood on a pier and said nothing of consequence. That is the entire institutional truth of this night, because nothing was written, nothing was recorded, nothing was ever meant to surface. There is no resolution filed anywhere. There is only what you decide standing on those wet boards, and whatever you decide, the record will never carry your name for it either way. And yet the absence of any record is itself the loudest part of this story. No case file, no wiretap, no informant, just 2 men, a pier, and a Friday deadline that exists nowhere except inside your own chest. That kind of silence outweighs every court transcript in this script combined. There's no clean way back from a conversation like that. You already know which way you're going to answer. This is the part of the channel where I usually remind you to subscribe. But right now, I'd rather you just sit with that pier for a second longer. Because everything after this point in the story only happens because of what gets decided in moments exactly like it. The day the commission almost came apart. You're sitting in the back of a social club in Cleveland, June 1976, 300 miles from your usual streets, because the bosses wanted neutral ground for this one. Routine. A commission sit-down, 5 families, civil, almost boring, the kind of meeting where men in good suits discuss territory the way other men discuss zoning. The thing that isn't routine is that one seat at this table is empty, and everyone in the room is doing the math on what that means before anyone says it out loud. You watch a Genovese capo light a cigarette with hands that are just slightly too steady, the way men get when they're working hard not to show anything. Someone mentions a name, and the temperature in the room changes without anyone moving. You learn later that in the week following this meeting, 3 different funeral homes across 2 states reported being booked solid, not because of anything that happened in this room, but because of what this room's silence set in motion elsewhere. The official record, what little exists, pieced together decades later from informant debriefings, describes this only as a regional summit to address jurisdictional concerns. No names, no outcome. What the men who were actually there remember is an apology that was never quite offered and never quite accepted, hanging in the air for the rest of the meeting. The matter was resolved, per later FBI summaries, through informal mediation among the parties. The summary runs 2 sentences. It does not mention the empty seat at all. But the FBI's summary is accurate as far as it goes. Mediation did happen. Parties did agree. And yet no summary will ever account for the specific stillness of that empty chair, untouched for the entire meeting, nobody willing to either sit in it or remove it. That chair said more than anyone at the table did. You left that meeting understanding something you couldn't have explained to anyone outside that room. The confession nobody filed. You're sitting in a booth at a diner on Canal Street, 4 a.m., February 1977, across from a man who has just told you, in a voice so flat it barely sounds like confession, that he did the thing on the pier 2 years ago. Routine. Diners at this hour are full of cabbies and insomniacs. Nobody looks at anybody else too long. The thing that isn't routine is that this man, sitting across from you, has just handed you knowledge that could end his life if it ever left this booth. You watch his hands around a coffee cup he hasn't drunk from. You notice he hasn't blinked in longer than feels natural. He's not asking for forgiveness. Men in this life don't ask for that. He's asking you to carry it, the way you've carried everything else for everyone else for years now, because that's what a fixer actually is. Not the man who solves problems. The man other men hand their weight to when they can't hold it themselves anymore. What never appears in any file, any wiretap, any grand jury transcript, is this exact diner booth, this exact hour, this exact confession. As far as the institutional record is concerned, this conversation is one more night that simply didn't happen. There is no resolution. There was never going to be one. The matter remains, officially, closed without explanation, the way most things in this life eventually do. But silence has always been this world's preferred form of resolution. And yet what you're carrying out of that diner booth weighs more than anything a courtroom could have handed down. You're not holding a secret anymore. You're holding a man's whole life. You walk out of that diner, a different kind of person than you walked in as. The knock on your own door. You're standing in your own hallway, your own apartment, August 1978, and it's 3 in the morning, and someone is knocking the way only one kind of person knocks at 3 in the morning. Routine doesn't exist anymore by this point in your life. There is no routine left to violate, because every night for the last year has felt like the night before something. The thing that isn't routine, specifically tonight, is that you recognize the knock, and recognizing it tells you everything you need to know before you even open the door. You see his face through the peephole before you let him in, not a stranger, a man you've shared coffee with, envelopes with, silence with, for the better part of a decade. He doesn't say much once he's inside. He doesn't have to. You already understand that the thing on the pier, the thing in the diner, the years of being the man who fixes other men's problems, has finally arrived at your own front door, and there is no envelope thick enough to fix this one. What will eventually exist, in a federal indictment 2 years from this exact night, is a single paragraph naming you only as cooperating individual 4, your real name redacted for your own protection, your decade of work reduced to a number with no face attached. The matter officially resolves with witness relocation, a sealed plea, a name that stops existing the way it used to exist. But the indictment's redaction is, in its own cold way, a kind of mercy. And yet no sealed document will ever record what it felt like to stand in your own hallway, at 3 in the morning, finally on the other side of the door you'd knocked on for other men 100 times before. That's the whole decade, distilled into one threshold you can't uncross. You already crossed it. You just didn't know it would feel like this. If you want more videos like this, subscribe.